Let me ask the Professor Robert Sutter to present the paper on the Trump administration policies toward the Korean Peninsula and the unification of Korea and South Korea's responses. Please.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be here with you today for this opportunity, and I thank the organizers for inviting me to come to this important panel and these important meetings here in Seoul. My presentation, you have a paper that's in the handout that you have. My presentation is shorter than that, and it's something that comes from Washington, I guess, is that you always have to be within the time limit and be very careful. So I had to pare it down a bit in my presentation. It focuses on what we know, and I emphasize that, what we know about the incoming Trump administration's policies toward the Korean Peninsula and the unification of Korea, and it offers some implications for South Korea. It has two parts, and they both are like situation reports. I was involved in a situation report on Korean and other attitudes toward the United States during the elections. And I benefited from that, and I'm incorporated those findings in the first part of the paper. What did the experts in South Korea think about Trump before the election? And then the second part is also based on interviews that are underway in the region, looking at U.S.-China competition and what the countries are doing as a result of that. And those interviews in South Korea are used to help me in the second part of looking at what Trump's done and how the South Koreans have reacted. So what did South Korea expect from the Trump administration prior to the election? Prior to President Trump's successful election in November and taking office in January, South Korean government officials and non-government specialists and commentators expected generally negative consequences for South Korean interests if Trump once again took office. Heading the list were disruptive tariffs, focused on China in particular, because of its large trade surplus with the United States, but also including South Korea and other major trading partners with a trade surplus with the United States. Another element in this situation was also expected were renewed demands from Trump's first administration regarding the idea of South Korea providing more host nation support for the U.S. forces in Korea and to increase military spending and undertake more responsibility in defense of allied interests in the Korean Peninsula and the broader region. Another element, Trump's first-term policy on North Korea changed radically, as we know, from unprecedented threats, let's not forget that, to two amicable summit meetings, which tended to put South Korea in a secondary position in dealing with North Korea. Some in South Korea saw the summits as an opportunity to progress toward an eventual peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. But as we know, the summits failed, and North Korea resolutely advanced its nuclear weapons capabilities. Whether Trump would once again seek a summit and possibly reach an agreement with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un remains uncertain. It is also expected that Trump would put aside the Joseph Biden's administration's efforts to sustain close consultations with allies and partners and follow agreed upon and predictable policies. It was expected by the South Koreans to be unpredictable and often unilateral in making abrupt policy changes with little warning. Because South Korea needed to preserve the solid alliance relationship with the United States in the face of an expanding North Korean threat, Seoul's options for dealing with negative consequences of Trump's re-election was seen as limited. Please keep in mind an ally's concern with keeping the alliance. This is something you're going to see all over the region. And this is something that even when they're in bad circumstances with the United States, they still want that alliance. Okay, now let's look at what happens when Trump takes power. Whatever concerns South Koreans had about their relations with incoming Donald Trump administration were superseded by South Korea's protracted leadership crisis, following the aborted declaration of martial law by President Yoon on December 3. The prolonged transition process ended 6 months later with the election of President Lee on June 3rd. But the aftermath put issues of needed political reform and economic stimulus at the top of the new administration's policy agendas. It's important to keep this in mind. If South Korea has big differences with the Trump administration, they still remain secondary in their priority in dealing with the issues they face today. These domestic issues are more important. Okay, then we have Trump taking action and as a president. And this is something, the issue of his control is something that's been mentioned, and I just want to make a couple of concrete points about this. He has great support, he has great control over the federal bureaucracy of the federal government. He didn't have that before. Now he has it. It's very tightly controlled. Everybody's doing what Mr. Trump wants to do. They're very careful about this. He controls the Congress. I worked for Congress for 23 years. You don't control the Congress easily, but he controls the Republican majorities in the Congress. He can get them to do what he wants them to do. And so this is great power. The Supreme Court, the courts could be a check on his power. 6 of the 9 members of the Supreme Court were done by Republicans, and 3 of them were appointed by President Trump himself. So he has a lot of leverage in the U.S. government at this particular time. So what he wants is quite important. And what does he want? Well, he did all sorts of things that were very dramatic. And so waves of executive orders mandated radically reducing the size, cost, and impact of U.S. government organizations. Tens of thousands of federal government employees lost their jobs. Foreign aid and other spending abroad was frozen. The FBI, CIA, State Department, and other agencies protecting America at home and abroad were being downsized. The U.S. withdrew from the landmark Paris Climate Treaty Agreement, the World Trade Organization. President Trump prominently threatened Canada, Mexico, Denmark, Panama, and Colombia with harsh measures if they didn't meet his demands for U.S. control over the Panama Canal, over Greenland, and even over Canada. And then he did this. He supported Putin's claims. He rebuked the Ukrainian president and signaled an end to U.S. leadership in supporting opposition to Russian expansionism. Some South Korean critics warned of such a U.S. reversal involving the American commitment to defend South Korea. And they were not reassured when Trump's remarkable thaw with Russia coincided with Putin's solidifying support for North Korea, then promising to punish South Korea. Trump's tariffs, and then we get to tariffs. Trump's tariffs went well beyond what had been anticipated. Remember, they had been anticipating these tariffs, but nothing like this. South Korea was impacted by specific tariffs on autos as well as steel and aluminum and so-called reciprocal tariffs. They came on top of a fixed tariff rate, leading to the overall rate of 35%. China retaliated, leading to a tit-for-tat escalation. Many South Korean suppliers of components to Chinese products exported by China to the United States were impacted by this kind of development. Now, in response to these actions, international markets reacted badly. And this caused the U.S. administration to do what? To shift, to compromise, to move, to have a pause in the reciprocal tariffs. So we need to keep that in mind as well. You know, there's a big action and then a pullback. At home, President Lee in Korea and the leadership of the National Assembly are in the same political party and closely aligned. But the political opposition remains a force amid divided public opinion. Dealing with Trump administration challenges head the list of foreign priorities, along with the growing threat from North Korea, backed more strongly by Russia, and with China consistently siding with them, despite some signs of disagreement. Against this background, President Lee is seen likely to follow pragmatic policies, seeking progress and endeavoring to deal effectively with negative developments at home and abroad. Trump administration tariffs are outwardly much more serious than seen during the first Trump administration. but their impact has been weakened by the reversal and pause in the reciprocal tariffs, and U.S. seeking compromises with China to avoid a trade war. Against this background, the Lee administration pledges to negotiate with South Korean interests firmly in mind. South Korean experts note that South Korea may get better treatment on tariffs by offering greater South Korean investment in manufacturing in the United States, cooperation in U.S. efforts on high-technology export controls targeting China, assisting U.S. shipbuilding efforts, and other initiatives less costly to South Korea than the high tariffs. Regarding security issues, the worry that the United States might withdraw troops from South Korea and pull back from alliance commitments was offset by the strong military commitment to the Indo-Pacific region focused on deterring Chinese aggression, voiced by Secretary of Defense Hegseth on May 31. And this has subsequently been reinforced by the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Reported U.S. consideration of withdrawing 4,000 combat troops from South Korea to deal with a Taiwan contingency and the absence of clear Trump administration's positions on policy toward North Korea continue to raise concerns, with some in South Korea worrying the United States will seek to reach an agreement with North Korea, thereby freeing U.S. troops in South Korea to be repositioned or reoriented to deal with China. Widely discussed reported U.S. demands on increased South Korean defense spending and host nation support for U.S. troops in South Korea are there, but they need clarification. You don't know exactly what they're asking. There remains a long-standing and growing South Korean concern that U.S. commitment to protect South Korea from North Korean aggression will be reduced as North Korea develops a capacity to strike the continental United States with nuclear weapons. The concern is reinforced with President Trump's remarks seeking to accept North Korea as a nuclear power. Under these circumstances, South Korea is forecast to give greater consideration to nuclear options within the scope of the alliance and perhaps outside the scope of the alliance. In sum, South Korea, like most other U.S. allies and partners, is determined to preserve the alliance relationship with the United States. Despite the many difficulties and challenges posed by Trump administration policies and actions, they are prepared to put aside the Trump administration's reversal of the Biden government's emphasis on close allied consultation and cooperation. They are pragmatic in seeking solutions on economic and security issues. Looking out, some South Korean experts advise that since the U.S. seeks to rebuild its strength, South Korea could be important by cooperating with the United States on high-technology industries, on warship repair and building, on improving the capacities of the South Korean armed forces in line with U.S. strategy and other measures. But other South Korean experts judge that the U.S. government actions in 2025 show gross incompetence in planning and executing important policies, which has weakened the power, influence, and value of the United States to South Korea. Regarding China, President Lee is expected to seek improved ties with Beijing, but a major breakthrough is seen as unlikely. This is important to keep in mind. It's often considered that a U.S. loss is a Chinese net gain. It really isn't in most cases because of China's actions. But Beijing, the public opinion remains negative, and opposition in South Korea about China, and opposition may again seek advantage by portraying the government as pro-China. South Korea is alienated by China, continues support for Russia in Ukraine, featuring ever closer North Korean involvement, and development of adding to the North Korean threat to South Korea. Economically, China remains important for various South Korean businesses, but China also is ever more serious a rival, threatening South Korea's advantages in modern manufacturing. South Korea does not see China providing a market for South Korean manufactured goods now excluded by tariffs from the U.S. market. Rather, China is sending to South Korea and other world markets sophisticated manufacturers previously sent to the United States market, now blocked by tariffs. China as a consumer is hard to see. They can't displace the United States that way at all. On Japan, Lee is forecast for now to continue the recent improvement in cooperation. And like other U.S. Indo-Pacific allies and partners, the Seoul government is seeking a wider array of economic and security agreements bilaterally and multilaterally with Indo-Pacific governments and others, such as NATO, in order to support its interests at a time of uncertainty in relations with the United States. So some conclusions. Based on what we know up to this point, they include this. Trump administration's use of tariffs is clear and worse than expected. Its impact remains uncertain, given the U.S. retreat in the face of international markets reacting negatively to the initial barrage of tariff announcements and China's firm reaction. Second, Trump's security policy remains to be officially released, but seems to be focused on a more robust military effort to deter Chinese expansionism in Asia. This counters the concern that Trump seeks to make a deal with China at the expense of Asian allies and partners, comparable to his recent turnabout siding more with Putin and withdrawing support from Ukraine and European allies. And what we see is a doubling down of the military commitment to deter China in the Indo-Pacific. Widely reported U.S. demands on increased South Korean defense spending and host nation support for U.S. troops need clarification. It's hard to gauge how important they are at this point. As expected, Trump's treatment of South Korea and other allies and partners is much less consultative and cooperative than Biden's administration. Trump's policies on North Korea and issues involved with Korean unification remain to be determined, very vague. And unlike other regional governments giving top priority to dealing with Trump administration initiatives, South Korea gives top priority to domestic issues of political reform and economic revival following 6 months of dramatic presidential leadership crisis. Do I have 2 more minutes? Okay, I thought I might have a little extra time. And let me just, I've done about 55 interviews in the Indo-Pacific region thus far about about gauging U.S.-China, their country's position in the U.S.-China competition and rivalry. And it's hard to come with general findings, but it clarifies what Trump's administration is doing and why they're doing it. Because Trump himself is very episodic and very scattered and unpredictable and moves from one thing to the next. But there is a big change in American policy that was pointed out to me by observers in Japan and in Australia. And this, I wanted to share it with you. It's based on these interviews, you see a major change in U.S. strategy toward the Indo-Pacific region, justifying it. For over 5 decades now, the U.S. government has justified close and cooperative engagement in the Indo-Pacific for an important rationale: the need for close beneficial engagement with Asia's vibrant economies. That's been in the documents throughout this period. And so, well, yes, Asia is a vibrant democracy, but Mr. Trump and his people see this element in the past was a significant, important element, adding to the long-standing U.S. security rationale of preserving a favorable balance of power in East Asia. That latter has been there, and it still is. But this one has changed. Donald Trump's administration no longer sees economic engagement as a positive with these East Asian countries. It is seen as a net negative. The United States is in the process of making it more positive. So the U.S. government is trying to do things that will make it a more positive relationship, not to withdraw, but to do it. But the question is, will they get what they need? Will they get what they want? I think that's a big question. And so this is if that doesn't work, an important reason for its U.S. strong involvement in the region will be removed. So keep that in mind. It helps me to understand it. If you lose that, then you don't have the same bond that you had before. And the reason to stay closely engaged is reduced. However, the long-standing U.S. security rationale remains. The competition with China is very hot. And the military emphasis of the Trump administration underlines that point. And so this will remain. And remember, this was the main rationale for U.S. involvement in dealing with East Asia in the 1950s and in the 1960s and up through the 70s. Well, certainly through the 50s and 60s. In other words, it was security. It wasn't the vibrant economies of Asia, hardly. That came later. And we had a close relationship with various countries at that juncture. So anyway, I thought the development was important. It certainly it struck me as something that it's a way of thinking about it, which I think might help us as we proceed. So I'll stop there and wait for questions.